probably done better at home than what they have in a school setting.
Yeah.
But now that there's a time scale on the children having to go back to school, the levels of anxiety have shut up. So we've had a lot more calls from foster carers asking for support with the children. So what we've been doing with a lot of the foster carers is just helping them to reassure the child and understanding that it's okay, a bit of acceptance, and that it's okay for the child to be anxious, and really sitting with that feeling. So we've been able to do, we haven't been able to do physical contact, but what we've done through Zoom and through telephone support is the normal paceful practices that we would do ordinarily is just reacting that with the child and really giving them that space to express what their fears are and what they're worried about. And what we found is that they're just having to reenact the whole scenario of joining a new school and making new friends.
So treat them like it's new. Yeah. That's a lovely way of,
a lot of the children are putting up a barrier or just shutting down completely. And it is through nothing but worry and concern that they're going to have to build relationships again and be accepted by their friends. A few of them have been concerned that they would have forgot things as well. I can't remember where I'm supposed to hang my coat. I can't remember where do I put my PE kit, and simple things like that has been a massive stress factor for them, and it's something that we probably didn't think of before any of this started. But it's finding ways of reassuring the child that all of those feelings are okay.
Right. And I'm guessing, Delroy, that it's really hard for the foster carers to feel the kids have slipped back so much. And maybe there's a tendency, there is in all of us, isn't there, often to want to move them on a bit and go, you'll be fine, you'll know when you go back, you'll remember, instead of kind of, so you perhaps have helped them kind of make sense. I imagine you've done a lot of thinking with the foster carer, okay, maybe we just need to slow this down with this young person and just stick with the, oh my gosh, this is hard.
The natural tendency is to want to fix that problem straight away. And a lot of the time we're kind of like jumped in with 2 feet and not kind of like, oh, okay, let's just let the child kind of express how they're really feeling about this. Let's not try and fix it straight away. Just giving that time and acceptance. One of the things that we've suggested is phased returns. Because a lot of the children were worried about just going straight back into school full time. So with the foster carers and with the teachers at school, we've kind of had some open dialogue about giving them an hour or two in the first week and see how it goes.
Really slow,
Move that along to a day, and then 2 days, and then 3 days, whatever works best with the child. And reintroducing them to more playful learning activities at school is something that a lot of children really benefited from as well.
Yeah, so that thinking younger again, Delroy, isn't it? Like letting the child be young, much younger if they need to be. Yeah.
I'm also thinking of the levels of stress for the foster carers and the support networks that maybe they haven't got that they had before lockdown, and just that sense of, if you can talk to other foster carers, you know that their children are responding in the same way, and that can be hugely helpful to feel it's not just me getting it wrong, or the kids are just not settling when they should be, but actually no, all the children seem to be similar, or the foster carers are feeling really worn out now and tired, and I'm not the only one feeling that way. And those support networks are hard. I mean, I'm sure there's WhatsApp groups and Zoom meetings amongst foster carers, but when you've got the children there 24/7, it's just harder to access that sort of support. And yet it's such an essential part of getting through this, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I had a foster carer last week who said to me, I know this sounds really mean, but I want to hear from the other foster carers that they're finding it as hard as me. It's what you're saying, Tim. She's just feeling quite alone in it, and it helps.
Yeah.
Interestingly, that's one of the first questions that I get asked when I'm speaking to the foster carers is, what's the other parents, what the other foster carers, how are they coping, what are they doing?
Yeah. vulnerable groups like the sort of families you work with from minority groups, Delroy, who are quite isolated in a lot of situations, aren't they?
Very much so. I've had some conversations this week with young people from the BAME community, and there's a couple of children that have pretty much refused to go back to school until they feel safe. They're worried about bringing the disease back home to the carers, and it was really quite stressful. I was surprised at how anxious child that I was speaking to, how worried they really were about bringing this coronavirus back into the home. I'm worried about how they are going to be perceived by their school friends. Do they think that we're going to pass the disease on to them because Black children and Asian children get it more than other people? So there was real anxiety levels within the children, which I think is something that the teacher should be prepared for, or have some kind of process in place to deal with that.
We can so underestimate, can't we, how much children are taking in from what's going on around and what they're hearing, and you know, especially children who are not probably very good at talking about their worries. So these worries can be bubbling away, maybe like we talked about last time, coming through in some difficult, challenging behaviours. And actually, these poor kids are so scared.
Oh, so scared. I've had children tell me, you know, children who are fostered by white families or they're in transracial adoptions, their parents just don't get it, and they don't want them to have to get it. They want to protect them from it, but it leaves the child so alone, doesn't it? And there's already that division, but now with this situation, as you're describing, Delroy, these kids are even more kind of, you know, separated by the colour of their skin or their racial sort of background, aren't they? And for schools to be aware of that, teaching staff, that's going to be so important, isn't it? And knowing how we might speak to them, how we might speak to both. I think it was you, Alison, that said last time something really helpful about how both sides of the children of both sides of this might be spoken to, and how it might be helpful to make them both make sense of it, because children who are being racially sort of abusive or divisive are speaking from a place of fear, from something they've heard from adults, and so it's addressing their fears, isn't it, as well as the child who's the target and the young person. You know, how do we sort of do that in a paceful way? Really tough.
And maybe getting teachers to talk about it before anything happens is an even better way. So being aware that for some children this is even harder, and being able to talk about that as soon as they arrive back, or even before then. You know, I've been hearing this week about teachers that have been reaching out to kids before they come back, setting up Zooms so that they can see the classrooms, because the classrooms are so different. I'm beginning to talk to them about letting them know all the things that are going to be different, how it's going to smell different, it's going to look different, the noises are going to be different, and really helping them think about it. And I guess what you're saying says that's another part of, you know, maybe it will be harder for you. Maybe the other kids might say things that sound mean, and we really, or that are mean, and we really want to help you with that. And we're going to be alongside you and check that stuff out. So talking about it right from the beginning, I think.
Yeah. And maybe talking about it with the kids that might say it too. You know, all the kids coming back that might be afraid and have got confused about this. You know, how do they find ways to address that? As you say, it's preparation, isn't it? So that they have some thoughts in their heads ready, not to just go, just get out of the classroom. You know, you're not allowed to say that, or whatever would normally happen. Yeah.
I'm thinking that it's going to be so important to really meet and talk so much in the small groups they're going to have in school, and to really think about those things together in the very early meetings, and to spend so much time focusing on that group dynamic and how the group's going to get on, and what each individual is bringing into the classroom from home, what lockdown's been like for them, what their stresses have been, what their challenges have been, what the great bits have been, if there have been any, to really get a sense of what's going on inside everybody. And then perhaps they can begin to think about the things that might come up, and how as a group those things might be dealt with. That kind of pre-armed, you know, I think is a really important part of everybody, from whatever situation they're coming from, is really getting an understanding of what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes as best they can at the age they are.
I think that's a lovely idea, and I know that schools are really busy, but I was also thinking about, once they've decided on the groupings, and I really hope that they think that through, from, you know, thinking about how children find safety from different peers, and I hope they think that through, but then to start to reach out to those groups together, like you say, Joy, before they've even come back in, I think would be creating safety, either on a WhatsApp group if they're older, or you know, on a Zoom or whatever, or through their foster carers, adopters, parents.
Exactly. So you've got that secure base at home being prepared in the same way as at school, that joined up thinking, Alison, isn't it? That homeschool bridge we were trying to talk about last time, that,
I was
creating
reading,
more safety.
Sorry, sirs. I was reading today a book that's just been produced on the psychology of COVID-19, and I can't remember the name of the book, but very quickly put together by 4 very eminent psychologists, I think, who are advising governments on the way back in, and a lovely concept of we-ness, about how important it is to have a we-ness. We're all in this together, and that on every level, politically, country-wise, and then talking about individual schools, that idea of community, and we are all in this together, but also knowing, of course, as Kim said before, and we've all talked about, there are individual differences, individual needs in every family and every child, but the way forward is thinking about we're in this together, because that's actually what's mobilized community benefit through all of COVID-19, the idea of unity and community, and we need to keep that going rather than go back to default.
Yes, I think that's so important, Edwina. A young refugee said to me last week, welcome to my world. This is what it's been like for me all along. And in fact, COVID has been an improvement for me, because there have been some services, and in fact, a couple of single adopters have also said to me, I've been trying to cope on my own for years. People disappeared long ago. So actually, schools have stepped up and seen what I've needed and taken my child in. And when, the other key worker kids were in, they sort of allowed adopted kids to go in, and it's made such a difference. So I think there has been a weeness for some people that's quite surprising, isn't it? That we wouldn't have almost expected. But how do we hold on to that now going forward?
I really like Louise Bomber's ideas about memorial walls and memorial trees.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. And a remembrance board, Kim, she said, didn't she? And a sadness board. Yeah.
And I was just thinking, in terms of weeness, if you have, a tree for sadness, a tree for worries, a tree for, nice, pleasant things, happy memories, a tree to remember people you've lost or are worried about. That could be, you could invite the parents, teachers and children to be adding to those trees or boards or walls. And that would be one way of really creating a we community, wouldn't it?
So much.
We are all in this together, and we all have our worries and our fears and our losses and sadnesses and our happy moments.
I will I'll send the reference for the book, because I can't remember. I should have had it here. I'll send it to everybody, and maybe we could include it as the resources connected with this recording as well.
Great.
I don't think it's copyrighted. I think it's out for anybody who wants to read it. So
great. Oh, that sounds great, Edwina. Thank you. As Delroy and I were talking, weren't we, about the cultural sort of differences around grieving too, and how we really don't grieve that well in this country generally, and how much has been lost for so many communities, for everybody who's lost someone, but particularly you were saying about Caribbean families have this. Could you speak about it, Delroy? You can speak about it better than I can.
Yeah, I mean, we were speaking about teachers maybe having to, or foster carers, teachers having to deal with unprocessed grief because of how disproportionately minority groups are affected by this COVID-19. There's a high possibility that the children will have had family members, direct or probably extended, that will have been affected by this. Normally, when there's a death within the community, there's a series of events called 9 nights. So what would happen would, for example, if a relative of mine passed away, family would gather for 9 nights leading up to the funeral. So there'd be food and drink and storytelling, and you're probably reliving the good parts and the bad, and remembering everything that's happened in that person's life. But it's a really integral part of the grieving process. So you have these 9 nights up into the funeral, and then at the funeral itself, it's a massive event where you probably get hundreds of people turn up, and the funeral will last the majority of the day, and there is a mass release of grief there. You probably find it surprised at the level of grief that you would see there, because when I've been to British funerals, they do tend to be a lot more reserved, whereas for us there is a complete outpouring of grief. You just let it all out, and it doesn't matter what that looks like. It just kind of is what it is. For the child not to have been through any of that and had to kind of watch the funeral through Zoom, how we're meeting now, is a massive difference for them. So then having to then go to school and kind of act like nothing's happened, they would be in a kind of awkward position for them.
Yeah. So having some sort of acknowledgement of that at school is going to be really important, as Kim says, isn't it? And in Louise's lovely idea, Louise Bomber's idea of marking that at school and acknowledging that school is a place of community.
Yeah, creating that space for them to kind of let that grief out a little bit as well, or just to talk about it, because that is normally what we would have done. We would have been talking to someone quite some time for the 9 nights, and then at the funeral as well, and that's kind of been taken. Not kind of, it has been taken away from them. So it's kind of finding a way to bridge that gap, or challenging that, all those emotions that are going to be bottled up, really.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you. And I wonder if, I mean, I'm sure all of us can think of the kids we work with, how their loss and grief might play out in their behaviour that wouldn't suggest they were grieving, or you know, it wouldn't be an obvious kind of sadness, and how we can maybe help school staff think about that, and home sort of carers as well, parents and all their carers at home, because we all know there will be behaviours that will be very challenging, don't we, that we're going to see, and how that might be responded to. Again, I guess it's going to be in preparation, Alison, like, and you and Joy were saying, something about preparing for that, isn't there?
Yeah, and that just made me think about how homeschool communication, which is always important, is going to be even more important, isn't it? It's who's going to translate for that child. You know, how can the carer or the doctor let the school know that actually they're grieving, but they might not be able to show it in a way that's okay in school, and so make them aware of that, and hopefully then they can talk to them about it. And the other way around, so for school to be able to talk to foster carers about, hey, do you know, actually it was a really difficult day because he came in and there'd been lots of stuff cleaning, and that really activated something for him. The smell was overwhelming, and you know, he ended up curled up in a corner. You know, anything like that will just be so important to just keep telling both sides.
Yeah, we were talking about buddying up last time, Edwina, weren't we? And how the staff might buddy up with each other to co-regulate. So they've got somebody in school, another member of staff, looking out for each other, but also buddying up an older child with a younger child. Yeah. And I was also wondering about buddying up a key member of staff at school with a family, so that really guarantees that homeschool bridge in a way, doesn't it? That the person who's their person in school is also their person, the foster carer or the adopter's person as well. So that really guarantees that kind of regular backwards and forwards joined up thinking homeschool bridge.
And that homeschool bridge is really important as well, isn't it, to recognise and support the children with separation anxiety, because it's been a long time now, hasn't it, where children have been at home with their families, and some of those, you know, all pervasive anxieties that are around for particularly children who've had developmental traumas, of you know, worrying that, are you still going to be there if you know, when I come home? All of those things have had chance to subside, and I think I predict they're going to come back massively. Yeah, as the children are moving back into school, and parents are going out and doing more as well, going back to work, going, the shops are going to
Sure.
open, so there's going to be more to and fro from the home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one way of helping children with their separation anxiety is if they know teachers and parents are talking together, and that the teacher can help the child know that the parent is keeping the child in mind, and the parent can know that the teacher is help the child to know that the teacher is keeping the parent in mind.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. I've got you here all
yeah,
the
sorry, I
time.
didn't put that very well, but yeah,
Yeah,
the bridge seems to me really needs to be a really practical bridge.
yeah, and very explicit, Kim. I guess really, making it clear for the child that is happening, or the young person.
Yeah, because if the foster carer can, or the adopter can say, your teacher knows how hard it is for you. So, but actually, if you're able to have those conversations together, if a teacher is able to say to a child in front of the carer, this is going to be really different from how your school used to be. It might make you feel wobbly in your tummy. It might be so hard to concentrate. You might not be able to learn. We understand that. Then the foster carer can repeat that as well. Your teacher really understands that it's hard for you to learn right now. So just being able to have those joined up conversations. Again, I don't know if that's possible. But that would be so ideal, I think.
Yeah.
I think just from what you're saying, it seems so important that the homeschool bridge is verbal as much as possible, maybe rather than written, because I think sometimes that real sense of the tone of voice that's so important for us in DDP, and holding that non-judgment, gentle, curious empathy as we're trying to make sense of things together, can be done so well verbally, but it's often more difficult to do in writing. And again, sometimes the child's missed out if it's done in writing in the more traditional homeschool book way. So again, I think I'm building on what you're saying, Alison. If schools can carve out the time for that key person to be having those regular conversations, we talk in DDP about talking about a lot, don't we? And the child kind of being part of those conversations at a distance, listening in to key people in their life, really trying to understand them and work together as a team to really help them to feel this difficult time, or this different time for some.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess as well, absolutely. But there we have the issue about the non-verbal joining that and being backed up with the non-verbal. So not necessarily things that are written down, but I think, that we have that term transitional objects, and that's going to become tricky as well, I think, in terms of COVID-19. We're not sure how much it's carried by objects, but I guess there are things that we will all talk regularly with families about, I guess, about key rings in the pocket with pictures of your family or picture of your teacher that can be maybe safely carried. I don't know. There is a whole issue there, isn't there, about how do you have objects as well that representative when they could be carrying COVID?
Really tricky.
Yeah. My guess is, though, that communities and schools, and it is the community there, can be pretty creative about thinking about those things and making it safe.
There's lovely things Louise Bomber does, Edwina, isn't there? She suggests like drawing a heart on each other's hand in the morning and saying, when I look at my heart, I'm going to be thinking of you. When you look at your heart, you're going to know I'm thinking of you. And
yes, of course.
There are some lovely ways, but they're going to have to be very creative, as you say, because we're so challenged, aren't we, at the moment? What will be allowed, what will be safe to do.
Yeah, and I guess what's also popped into my head, though it's moving aside a little, I know, was thinking about the fact that, the curriculum maybe is thinking about the foot off the pedal in terms of learning, and teachers will find that hard because that's what they do. They teach, and there's a pressure there to show academic achievement. Although in Scotland we have health and well-being as centre of the curriculum. I think it's a bit different in England. But I know we've talked before about think young, foot off the pedal, but I'm also really aware that some children actually will really want to get back to their maths and their English and their formal curriculum. And that will be very much a structure for them and a comfort blanket for them going back. Yes.
Oh, I was just thinking about what Delroy, when you were talking about the phase starts and how we might help schools to really lower their expectations of kids being able to manage coming back, their attendance and stuff. There will be times when they come back and we think they're in a routine and then they regress again. They're hit by the loss, they're hit by the change, and they have to pull back, and how we can allow for that in the system. It's going to be important, isn't it? It's not going to be linear, their progress, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, it's helped that we kind of have a good relationship with a lot of the schools that the children attend, so they've been quite accepting about the prospect of phase return. But kind of mapping it out definitely helps, and including the child in this process as well gives them a sense of that they've got some kind of control about this returning back to school. So kind of incorporating them in the conversation has been useful as well.
Yeah, in that lovely kind of DDP, as Joy said, storytelling way of let's think about this together. What's going to feel okay, and it might feel okay now, but it might not next week, and that's okay too.
Definitely.
I guess we have another one of those sayings that comes along with DDP, akin to the slow down to go faster, is often 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And the fear that, for example, foster carers, adoptive parents, kinship carers, residential workers can have when they see children making progress in ordinary times, and then suddenly it feels as if the child is back to showing behaviours that they thought had diminished.
Yeah.
You have to figure out what that back is about. So there's a fear that the child is going to go right back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
And it's just saying, well, yeah, the process will potentially be 3 steps forward, 1 back, 2 back. It will be that to and froing, won't it?
Yeah. Sometimes 6 steps back. Sometimes like, oh my goodness, we're back here again for the teachers and the
That's okay. That's going
parents
to be
and carers.
a process. That is part of the process of recovery, that you go forward and back, forward and back.
Yeah. And how hard that is for the adults. Really hard to keep managing that with 30 kids.
Yeah, I'm thinking about for some of the foster carers and adopters that I work with, the thought of the kids going back to school just feels so terrible, because they know that it's going to be so hard for the kids, and they know that they're going to get some really tricky stuff coming back.
Oh, so hard for them. Yeah. Having worked so hard to get to a place quite a lot of them have got to with the kids and giving them stability. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dreading those sort of broken night's sleep and all those regressive behaviours coming back. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like what's important for us to do is to really think about what that will be like for them before we bombard them with lots of ideas of how they can help their child. We need to really think about the impact on them and how tough this is for them, managing lockdown and now having to manage this going back to school, and knowing that it's going to be really hard. On the one hand, they want them to go back to have a break, and on the other hand, they just don't want them to ever go back because it's going to be so hard.
I think there's a lot of anxiety to an adoptive family that I'm working with at the moment, just around, is it the right thing to send one of my children back and not the other? Is it really going to be safe? Am I making the right decision? And there's just the weight of that decision is been really heavy on one particular family. And again, I think linking to what you were saying, Alison, just sitting with that and not providing any advice for that adopter, just sitting with and hearing how difficult it is to make that decision, what's going on for her, the pros and cons in their family, which is unique to any other family. Just sitting and being alongside that, I think, is so important to support the process of thinking and making decisions the very best way that everybody can.
Yeah. It is so personal, isn't it? It is so unique to each family and each child and each school.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the world out there at the moment particularly is so full of judgment, isn't it? And we work so hard in this model to stay out of judgment, and I think it's going to be so important that we continue to do that so clearly and model it in everything that we do, and encourage others to do the same.
And I have been with some of the adoptive families, like a couple of families that I work with, where actually I haven't had any involvement with school because their child generally does okay in school, have got alongside them and helped them to set up meetings to talk about going back to school, even if they're not going back to school yet, just to try and get the school to hold them in mind and think about their specific, like you're saying, all children are so different, so thinking about their specific needs. And one meeting that I went to, we did a really lovely thing where we just went through their whole day. So we thought about the impact through their whole day, right from the transport, because normally they get a minibus, and how would they get to school and what would that be like, right through to the transition into school, where normally, so that would be different, where they'll be in the school, because actually they're going to be in the hall, not the classroom, so that will be different. Lunchtime, they'll have to take a packed lunch rather than have school dinner. So we just went through the whole day and thought about, for that particular child who's very hypervigilant, what will be the things that will be difficult for them, what will they notice, and how can we think about making it easier for them or preparing them for it. And that was a very responsive school that did a brilliant job at thinking about how they could help that child.
That's lovely. Really important. Yeah.
Yeah, emotional connection is so at the heart of everything, isn't it? So I was thinking, we've talked earlier about children who are maybe being racist or bullying. We've talked about children who feel that, want to test out things, want to be in the other children's faces and things like that. And it's so tempting to go straight to discipline in those moments, isn't it? Because you obviously want the child to learn how to behave appropriately. It's perfectly reasonable. But if you don't emotionally connect with the child, you don't really understand the things we've been talking about, the fears and anxieties and worries that are underneath those behaviours. And if you can emotionally connect with those, the child starts to feel understood, then the child might be able to manage your more disciplinary side of, your other hand says that you were talking about, of let's think how we could do this differently. And do you think that's a nice thing to have done and said or spat at that child? So emotional connection is, it's very big in DDP. Obviously, we do really prioritise it. And I think it's really key in helping these children come back into school.
Yeah. And it's all about the neuroception, isn't it? The sort of safety, Kim, as well. Like in DDP, we talk a lot about how we use our voices, how we use our faces to communicate safety. In the polyvagal system that Stephen Porges and Deb Dana talk about, they talk about how we give off signs of safety. And in DDP, we try to use a storytelling voice. We try to stay in touch with staying open and engaged ourselves to help the young person feel safe and connected to us. But that requires us to stay safe and regulated, doesn't it? And make sure we've got people around us and ways that we can keep ourselves regulated and safe. So it's a big ask of adults, isn't it? But it is.
Yeah, and I guess just adding into two hands of parenting, so that balance of boundary and empathy, because clearly children, young people need a boundary on that's not okay to do that. And yes, the connection has to come, but it's also how that boundary is given. And that connects to what you were saying, we're all saying about the adult being able to remain open and engaged. So trying not to shout, not to get overly anxious, but to still be able to give a boundary, because boundaries will be needed about that's not okay. We need to figure out, you can't expect that's not safe for other people. We need to figure out what you can do when you're upset. When you're anxious, because that's not okay. So that message is still given. It's how it's given.
Absolutely.
Edwina, you mentioned a couple of times about slow down to get there quicker. This is when slowing down is so important, isn't it?
Yes.
Because the child won't be able to hear that until they feel that the other person gets them.
Oh, absolutely.
They're understood.
Absolutely.
So that, slow down, start with the child's experience, figure out what's going on for them, and then they're much more able to listen to you when you say, but that's not the way we behave in our school.
Absolutely, yes. I think we talked before about A&E first, and then, absolutely, connection first.
Also, curiosity.
Yes, and of course we talked as well about the adults will make mistakes with this, because yes, they'll get anxious, and yes, they'll get angry, and yes, they'll shout. And then it's about repair. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
you know.
Repair is the bit, really, isn't it, that really builds the resilience and reduces the blame and the shame that a lot of these kids are wrestling with all the time.
Yeah.
That repair for an adult to say, so sorry, I got that wrong, I missed that, I didn't read that properly, did I forgot that you were, you know, you've had this tough time, I'm really sorry, let's try again, let's think about it together.
And I guess I'm just thinking that in terms, if you think about the temperature of things, so the emotional temperature is going to be quite hot at times, hotter than it would usually be. So I don't know, it just occurred to me, there's going to be a hot temperature, so that means that everybody's temperature up, and it's all about how do we not shout, how do we not do things when we're in our amygdalas and we're wanting things to stop. So
Yeah.
I guess I was also wondering about, in this situation, predicting it. So that could be quite helpful if you are aware of a young person or a child who's likely to do that, to talk to the teachers about it, to let them know. You know, my guess is that he's going to find it so hard when you say, nobody in this school must go within, you know, however close to each other. He's going to find that really hard, and he might need to push the limits there. Let's think together about what you might do if that happens, or that's maybe even you talk to him about that. You know, when we said that in assembly this morning, I'm guessing that could be really hard for you to stick to. I'm guessing that when you get that wobbly feeling, you might just want to go and get closer to somebody. And I'm around and I'm watching, and I'm hoping that when you get the wobbly feeling, you might be able to come to me, but I also know that you might not be able to. But I am going to try and help you through this. I'm not saying that would definitely work, but I think it would increase their safety and perhaps allow them to at least know that somebody is alongside them in that.
Yeah, and that's all about helping the child connect with their sort of inner world, isn't it? And know beforehand what they're feeling, because they won't know in those moments, will they? So that's going to really...
No, but also it is remembering and helping the school to remember that actually, if this is unbearable for the child, you know, the children that we work with are very good at getting their exit strategies. And if it's very clear to them that if they touch anybody or they go too close, then they will have to leave the school, then that might need to be their exit strategy. So I think we also have to help schools to just be quite aware of what's going on inside the kids and how they might show that.
Can I put the flag up for curiosity here, because we've talked about acceptance and empathy quite a lot. And for me, one of the keys for staff and parents to be able to do that is to hold on to their own curiosity. So to always have that wondering, I wonder why they're struggling with this, I wonder why this is hard for them right now, I wonder why they felt the need to spit at the other child. And holding on to your curiosity will help you to regulate. So that puts you into a better, says you talked about, Stephen Porges's work, it puts you into the open and engaged stance, which allows you to then produce more acceptance and empathy, because you have greater understanding and you have more natural empathy for the child when you've kind of figured out, well, yes, this child is frightened, even though they're behaving in an infuriating way right now.
So it's shifting from that he can't do it to I wonder why he can't do it, isn't it? He just can't do it. Well, I wonder why he can't do it, isn't it? Yeah, just that questioning.
I was thinking, Kim, of your seven circles for responding in the moment, and for those who know that, to really respond to it, because it's such a useful guide. Whether we can link it in at the end says, but a really helpful guide for people to apply to lots of different situations when they're responding in the moment. Very
much about slowing down.
Because wouldn't it, it would be so helpful if the teacher had been able to be curious with the child that just got too close or spat at another child, and actually worked out that, you know, we're doing our teaching in the hall this afternoon and I didn't know that was going to happen, and it feels so different. If they could really get to the bottom of it, get to the meaning behind the behaviour, and then they would be able to give them empathy for that, as well as help the child think about when you feel like that, spitting at someone is you know, I'm going to need to help you with that because that's not okay. But I understand that you were feeling so wobbly about being in the hall and that it smelt different.
And I guess, again, that's where the carers and parents might come in as well, is, you know, they might go home and then tell them that, or they might help them figure it out if they can't do it in school, mightn't they? Again, that communication of, oh, it was different. Something happened today at school. What was different? Because sometimes it can take a lot of detective work to get there, can't it? Especially when it's sort of something sensory that's wired in very young. It's really hard to pick up on those cues of danger sometimes, isn't it? And threat.
Yeah.
It's a big job, isn't it? It's a big task, but really worthwhile in changing these kids' experiences.
That teachers could do. I was thinking about how hopeful it could be for the future if we help teachers and people educating to really get their heads around this and really think about children's emotional needs. You know, I was kind of thinking about how in some schools they could do a sensory check-in every morning, you know, in their bubbles or you know, whatever. But actually in the longer term, if schools begin to really see that children start to feel safer, learn more, express themselves emotionally, that maybe some of these things they'll take on in the longer term, which would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
An opportunity for this we-ness, isn't it? That Edwina was talking about. It's an opportunity coming out of this, to see things in a different way of teaching, parenting.
And I guess, as you were saying that, Alison, it almost feels like, you know, we started off talking about the support that the adults will need, that the teachers will need going back in order for them to be able to talk about how hard it's been for them and the losses they've had. So there was something there linking about knowing that teachers absolutely want to do the best they can. They absolutely want to teach these kids. They're passionate about what they do, and they want to return safely too. So it's just that awareness of supporting that whole school community, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels like the children need lots of planned opportunities for connection and play in the classrooms, but also the staff need lots of planned opportunities for connection.
Oh, so much joy.
The support, you know, at both levels is crucial, isn't it?
And head teachers really prioritising that, isn't it? Prioritising their own self-care as head teachers, but also team sort of building and support and co-regulation amongst the staff really, really regularly, far more than they would normally have done. Yeah.
Head teachers doing sensory check-ins for teachers first thing in the morning. Wearing the body today.
Yeah.
And I do think we have some great examples in the UK of, if you like, attachment aware, trauma sensitive practice. We do have those examples. We're not, and certainly in Scotland, I can't speak for England, but that there's a real understanding and awareness about attachment and trauma in the classroom, and it comes through the health and wellbeing curriculum, which is central.
And I guess this is really a time now where we can be thinking about it for all, isn't it? A real time to apply these principles universally, because again, we don't know everybody's unique experience. So it helps to think about it on a whole class, a whole school, a whole community level.